The wrench slipped from my oil-stained fingers and clattered against the concrete floor, the metallic echo bouncing off the walls of Turner's Auto Repair like a gunshot in the pre-dawn silence. I cursed under my breath, wiping my hands on the already filthy rag tucked into my belt loop, my knuckles scraped raw from 3 straight hours of wrestling with a stubborn transmission that refused to cooperate. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced across the lifts and tool benches scattered throughout the garage. A space that smelled perpetually of motor oil, old coffee, and the ghost of my father's cigarette smoke that no amount of ventilation could ever fully erase. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood where most people knew better than to walk alone after dark, where sirens were the soundtrack to every evening, and where my little garage sat wedged between a bodega with bars on the windows and an apartment building that had seen better decades. I'd inherited this place 6 months ago when Dad's heart finally gave out after 40 years of breathing in exhaust fumes and carrying the weight of everyone else's problems on his shoulders. The inheritance came with a mountain of debt, a reputation for honest work in a dishonest neighborhood, and the stubborn belief that I could keep it running despite being 23 years old, female, and perpetually exhausted. The transmission I'd been fighting with belonged to Mrs. Chen from 2 blocks over, a woman who paid in cash and homemade dumplings because her Social Security barely covered rent. I'd promised her the car by morning, which meant I'd be here until sunrise, again, running on black coffee, and the kind of determination that probably looked like stupidity to anyone watching. My back ached from bending over the engine bay, my shoulders burned from the repetitive motion of turning bolts, and my hands... God. My hands were a mess of calluses, cuts, and permanent grease stains that no amount of scrubbing could remove. I retrieved the wrench from where it had fallen, checking it for damage before returning to work. The garage was quiet, except for the hum of the compressor in the corner and the distant sound of traffic on Atlantic Avenue. Most of the neighborhood was asleep, or at least pretending to be, while I was here in my father's kingdom of broken machines and impossible repairs, trying to prove to myself and everyone else that I belonged in this world of combustion engines and torque specifications. The sound of a car approaching made me pause, my wrench frozen mid-turn. It wasn't the rattle of Mrs. Chen's Honda or the wheeze of Mr. Rodriguez's ancient pickup. This was different, a deep, powerful rumble that spoke of expensive engineering and excessive horsepower, the kind of engine that didn't belong in this neighborhood any more than a diamond necklace belonged in a thrift store. The sound grew louder, closer, until it pulled up directly outside the garage, and then fell silent, with a finality that made my stomach tighten with instinct I'd learned to trust in this neighborhood. I straightened slowly, wiping my hands again though it did nothing to improve their appearance, and moved toward the open bay door with cautious steps. The streetlight outside had been broken for weeks, shot out probably, or smashed by someone who preferred darkness, but the moon was full enough to illuminate the vehicle that had just arrived. A black Mercedes G-Class, pristine despite the dirty streets, with windows tinted so dark they looked like portals to another dimension entirely. 2 men emerged from the vehicle with the synchronized precision of military training, or something worse. They were large, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and they moved with the kind of controlled awareness that told me they'd hurt people before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Neither of them spoke as they approached, their footsteps heavy on the cracked pavement, their faces partially obscured by the shadows and the deliberate angle of their heads. The taller of the two, a man with a scar running from his left ear to his jawline, reached the bay door first and stopped just outside the boundary between street and garage, between their world and mine. He looked me up and down with an expression that revealed nothing. No surprise at finding a woman. No judgment. No emotion at all. And then he extended his hand. In his palm lay a set of car keys, expensive ones, the kind with electronic fobs and leather grips. "He returns at dawn," the scarred man said, his accent thick and unmistakably Eastern European, each word carefully chosen and weighted with meaning I didn't yet understand. Fix it. Before I could respond, before I could ask the 100 questions suddenly crowding my mind, he placed the keys on my father's old wooden workbench near the door and turned away. His companion, who hadn't spoken at all, gave me one last measuring look that made my skin prickle with awareness of how alone I was in this garage, in this neighborhood, in this moment. Then they were gone, walking back to a second vehicle I hadn't noticed before, a black sedan that had been idling at the curb, and disappearing into the Brooklyn night like ghosts who'd never been there at all. I stood frozen for several seconds, my mind trying to process what had just happened, while my body remained locked in place by equal parts confusion and caution. Then I moved to the workbench, picked up the keys, and looked out at the Mercedes that now sat in front of my garage like an offering or a threat. I wasn't sure which. The first thing I noticed as I approached the vehicle was the damage. The front windshield had a spiderweb crack radiating from a central impact point, the kind of damage that came from something hitting it hard and fast from the outside. The driver's side window was completely shattered, safety glass scattered across the leather seats inside like deadly confetti. And there was blood. Not a lot, but enough. A dark smear across the dashboard that looked almost black in the moonlight. My hand hesitated on the door handle. Every instinct I possessed, every lesson my father had taught me about knowing when to walk away, was screaming at me to refuse this job, to lock up the garage and pretend those men had never come, to protect myself from whatever situation had resulted in broken glass and bloodstains in a vehicle worth more than my garage made in a year. But I needed the money. God, I needed the money. The rent on the garage was 2 months overdue. The utility company had sent a final notice, and my own apartment's landlord had started making comments about eviction that sounded less like warnings and more like promises. One job like this, one vehicle belonging to people who clearly had money to spare, could buy me another month, maybe 2, of keeping my father's legacy alive. I pulled open the door, careful of the broken glass, and slid into the driver's seat. The interior smelled like expensive leather, gunpowder, and something metallic that I recognized as blood from the countless times my father had come home with scraped knuckles and split lips from disagreements with customers who thought they could intimidate an immigrant mechanic into free work. The smell made my stomach turn, but I pushed past it, focusing instead on the mechanical problem I'd been hired to solve. The key turned in the ignition, and the engine came to life with a sound that was wrong. A grinding, struggling rhythm that spoke of damaged components and failing systems. I listened carefully, my eyes closed, my mind cataloging each irregular beat, like a doctor listening to a patient's struggling heart. Timing belt, definitely. Possibly damage to the crankshaft. The grinding suggested metal-on-metal contact where there should have been smooth rotation, which meant whatever had caused the external damage had also caused significant internal problems. I killed the engine and sat in the darkness of the Mercedes, surrounded by the smell of blood and gunpowder and expensive leather, and made my decision. I would fix it. I would work through the night, like I always did, and I would have this vehicle running perfectly by dawn, like those men had demanded. Because I was good at this. Better than good. Better than most mechanics with twice my experience. And because refusing wasn't really an option when men like that gave you orders disguised as requests. I climbed out of the Mercedes, retrieved my rolling toolbox from beside Mrs. Chen's Honda, and began the work of transforming this crime scene on wheels back into the pristine machine it had been before whatever violence had occurred inside it. The timing belt took an hour to replace, working by the harsh light of my work lamp, my hands moving with practiced efficiency through steps I'd performed hundreds of times before. The crankshaft required more delicate work, careful realignment and precision I'd learned from watching my father's patient hands guide mine when I was barely tall enough to see over the engine bay. By 3 a.m., I'd moved on to the cosmetic damage, vacuuming the safety glass from the leather seats, scrubbing the blood from the dashboard with cleaning solution and paper towels that turned red, and then pink, and then clean again. By 4 a.m., I'd sourced a replacement windshield from my inventory of salvaged parts, calling in a favor from my glass guy who owed my father's memory enough to do an emergency installation without asking questions. By 5:30, as the first hints of dawn began painting the Brooklyn sky in shades of gray and amber, the Mercedes sat in my garage looking exactly as it should. Pristine, powerful, perfect, with no evidence of the violence that had marked it just hours before. I stood back and surveyed my work with the satisfaction that came from solving impossible problems, from taking broken things and making them whole, from proving once again that I belonged in this world my father had left me. The sound of footsteps approaching made me turn toward the bay door, where the morning light was beginning to filter through the urban haze. A figure stood silhouetted against the rising sun, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than my garage made in 3 months. He stepped forward slowly, deliberately, moving from shadow into light with the confidence of someone who'd never had reason to fear anything or anyone in his entire life. The first thing I noticed was his face. Sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, a strong jawline shadowed by precisely maintained stubble, dark eyes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, and lips pressed together in an expression that revealed nothing. He was handsome in the way that dangerous things are handsome, beautiful and terrible, and impossible to look away from. Probably in his early 30s, with the kind of physical presence that changed the atmosphere of any room he entered. He looked at the Mercedes, his dark eyes scanning every inch of the vehicle with the attention to detail of someone who noticed everything and forgot nothing. Then his gaze shifted to the garage interior, cataloging the tools, the other vehicles, the coffee pot in the corner, the faded photograph of my father and me that I kept tacked to the wall above the workbench. Finally, his eyes found me, oil-stained, exhausted, standing in my father's garage at dawn after a night of work that had transformed a crime scene into a pristine machine, and held my gaze with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. "Who fixed this?" His voice was deep and slow, each word carefully measured, with an accent that spoke of Moscow winters and Eastern European sophistication, the kind of voice that commanded obedience without ever having to raise its volume. I stepped forward, wiping my hands uselessly on my rag, and met his gaze without flinching because backing down had never been in my nature. "I did." His eyebrows rose fractionally, the only indication of surprise in an otherwise expressionless face. "You." He repeated the word like he was testing its weight, like he couldn't quite believe what I'd said. "Alone?" "I don't like to share the work." I kept my voice steady, professional, the tone I used with all customers who questioned whether a woman could handle their precious vehicles. He took a step closer, and suddenly the garage felt smaller, the air thicker, the space between us charged with something I didn't have a name for. I could smell his cologne now, woodsy and expensive, mixed with something darker that might have been tobacco, or might have been danger itself. His eyes traveled over me slowly, noting every detail, from my steel-toed boots to my oil-stained jeans to my father's old work shirt, with Turner's Auto embroidered over the pocket. "You don't know what you just did, girl." The way he said it wasn't a question or an accusation, just a statement of fact delivered with the certainty of someone who understood things I didn't. I crossed my arms over my chest, a defensive gesture I immediately regretted because it made me look smaller, weaker, exactly what I'd spent 6 months trying not to be. "I just did my job." For several long seconds he stared at me with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything I was trying to hide. The fear beneath the confidence, the exhaustion beneath the competence, the desperate hope that this job would be enough to save my father's legacy for another month. Then, slowly, deliberately, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile or a friendly smile or a reassuring smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted prey worth hunting, the smile of someone who'd decided something important and wouldn't be changing his mind. "And now," he said softly, his voice dropping to something almost intimate, almost dangerous. "It's your last day fixing cars for anyone else." 3 days passed before I understood what he meant by your last day. The morning after Alexei Morozov, I'd learned his name from the whispered conversations of my remaining customers, spoken with the kind of reverence usually reserved for natural disasters. Left my garage with his pristine Mercedes. I arrived to find 2 men standing outside. Not the same ones who'd brought the car, but cut from the same cloth. Broad-shouldered, expressionless, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb the early morning light. They didn't speak when I approached, just nodded once and took up positions on either side of my garage door like sentries guarding a fortress. "Can I help you?" I asked, my keys jangling nervously in my hand. The taller one, with a shaved head and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, finally spoke. "Boss's orders. We watch." "Watch what?" "You." He said it like it was obvious, like I should have expected armed men to suddenly appear outside my father's garage and stand guard over my every move. I wanted to argue, wanted to demand they leave, wanted to call the police. Except calling the police when dealing with men like Alexei Morozov was probably the fastest way to end up as a cautionary tale whispered in Brooklyn bars. So instead, I unlocked the garage, turned on the lights, and tried to work while pretending I couldn't feel their eyes tracking my every movement through the open bay door. Mrs. Chen came by at 9 to pick up her Honda. She took one look at the guards, clutched her purse tighter to her chest, and spoke in rapid Mandarin that I didn't need to understand to know meant she was terrified. I tried to reassure her, tried to explain they weren't there because of her, but she pressed 3 crumpled $20 bills into my hand, underpaying by $40, and drove away so fast her tires squealed against the pavement. By noon, I'd lost 2 more customers. By 3 p.m., the guards had been replaced by 2 different men, same build, same expressionless faces, same unsettling silence. By the time the sun set and I locked up for the night, I'd worked on exactly 0 vehicles and spent 8 hours feeling like a prisoner in my own garage, watched and cataloged and controlled by invisible strings I didn't know how to cut. The pattern continued. Guards outside my garage during the day, rotating in 8-hour shifts with military precision. My regular customers stopped coming, scared away by the presence of men who looked like they could kill you with their bare hands and wouldn't lose sleep over it. The only work that came through my door arrived in expensive vehicles driven by silent men who left keys and instructions and returned hours later to retrieve machines I'd restored to perfection. A Maserati with bullet holes in the trunk. A Range Rover with blood on the back seat. A Porsche with the steering column ripped out. Evidence of a failed theft attempt. Each vehicle told a story of violence and crime, and each one I fixed with the skill my father had spent 20 years teaching me, because refusing wasn't an option, and because, God help me, the money was enough to finally catch up on my rent, my utilities, my father's medical debt that had followed him into the grave. On the 5th day, Alexei himself returned. I was under a BMW M5, replacing the oil pan that had been damaged when someone, I didn't ask who, had driven it over something they shouldn't have, when I heard the sound of expensive shoes on concrete. I rolled out from beneath the vehicle on my creeper, oil dripping from my hands, my hair escaping from the messy bun I'd tied it in that morning, to find him standing in my garage like he owned it. He looked different in daylight, or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time, without the haze of exhaustion and confusion that had clouded that first dawn encounter. He wore another suit, this one charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders and narrow waist. His dark hair was swept back from his face, revealing high cheekbones and a forehead that spoke of intelligence and calculation. A gold watch caught the fluorescent light as he moved, expensive and understated, the kind of timepiece that cost more than most cars I worked on. Mia Turner. He said my full name like he'd been practicing it, testing how it felt in his mouth. 23 years old, only child of James Turner, deceased 6 months ago from myocardial infarction. Inherited this garage along with $63,000 in debt. No siblings, no close family, no romantic attachments. Lives alone in a studio apartment on Franklin Avenue. Walks to work every morning at 6 a.m. Drinks her coffee black because milk is an unnecessary expense. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood slowly, using the BMW for support because my legs suddenly felt unsteady. How do you know all that? I know everything about people who work for me. He said it casually, like he was discussing the weather, rather than revealing he'd invaded every aspect of my privacy. I don't work for you. I tried to sound firm, confident, but my voice came out smaller than I wanted, betrayed by the fear crawling up my spine. He smiled that predatory smile again, the one that made him look both beautiful and terrifying. Don't you? Who do you think has been sending you work? Who do you think has been paying you 3 times your usual rate? Who do you think has been keeping other customers away so you have no choice but to accept what I offer? The garage seemed to tilt around me as understanding crashed through my consciousness like a wrecking ball through glass. The guards weren't protecting me. They were claiming me, marking my garage as Morozov territory, warning away anyone who wasn't part of his organization. The expensive vehicles weren't random jobs. They were a test, a way to see if I could be trusted with his secrets, if I could fix his problems without asking questions that might get me killed. I didn't agree to any of this. My hands clenched into fists, oil still dripping from my fingers onto the concrete floor. You agreed the moment you fixed that Mercedes. He took a step closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. You proved you were capable, discreet, and desperate enough to take work without asking questions. Those are valuable qualities in my world, Mia Turner. Rare qualities. I want my regular customers back. I want your guards gone. I want... What you want? He interrupted, his voice dropping to something quieter, more dangerous, is to keep your father's garage. To honor his memory by continuing his work. To prove that a 23-year-old woman can survive in a world that eats people like you for breakfast. He paused, his dark eyes holding mine with unsettling intensity. And I can give you all of that. Protection from the people who would love to see you fail. Money to not just survive but thrive. Respect in a neighborhood where being young and female usually means being prey. In exchange for what? I already knew the answer. Could feel it in the way he looked at me, the way his presence seemed to fill every corner of my garage. Your loyalty, your discretion, your skill. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and touched my cheek with fingers that were surprisingly gentle, despite belonging to a man capable of unspeakable violence. You fix things, Mia. Broken machines, impossible problems. That's a gift. And I need someone with your gift who won't betray me, won't steal from me, won't sell my secrets to my enemies. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, leaving a smear of oil he didn't seem to notice or care about. My breath caught in my throat, my body responding to his proximity in ways my mind screamed were dangerous, foolish, suicidal. This man was a criminal, a killer, someone who controlled half of Brooklyn's underworld with violence and fear. Getting close to him was like sticking my hand in a fire and expecting not to get burned. And if I refuse? The question came out as barely a whisper. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold and final that made my blood freeze in my veins. Then I'll be very disappointed. And when I'm disappointed, people tend to have unfortunate accidents. Buildings burn down. Debts get called in early. Young women disappear. He said it matter-of-factly, without emotion, like he was reciting facts from a textbook rather than threatening my life. But you won't refuse, Mia. Because you're smart enough to understand that refusing me is the same as choosing to lose everything you've worked for. He was right. God help me. He was absolutely right. Refusing meant losing the garage, losing my apartment, losing any chance of honoring my father's memory. Refusing meant admitting defeat to a world that had been waiting for me to fail since the moment I inherited Turner's auto repair. Fine. The word tasted like surrender and survival in equal measure. I'll work for you. His smile widened fractionally, satisfaction flickering across his features before being replaced by his usual mask of control. Good girl. The way he said it made heat flood my face, part embarrassment, part something darker I didn't want to examine. Your first official job starts tonight. A shipment arrives at 11 p.m. that needs to be modified. Specialized work requires discretion and skill. What kind of modification? The kind we don't discuss in detail. He withdrew his hand from my face, the loss of contact leaving my skin cold. My men will bring the vehicle at 11. You'll work through the night if necessary. And Mia? He paused at the garage door, turning back to pin me with that intense gaze. Don't try to run. Don't try to contact authorities. Don't try to be a hero. Because I promise you, the consequences will be worse than anything you can imagine. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in my garage surrounded by broken machines and impossible choices, my cheeks still burning where he'd touched me, my mind spinning with the realization that I'd just sold my soul to the Russian MAFIA, because the alternative was losing everything. The vehicle arrived precisely at 11 p.m., delivered by 3 men I hadn't seen before. It was a Mercedes Sprinter van, white and nondescript, the kind used by contractors and delivery services across the city. But when they opened the back doors, I understood why Alexei needed someone with my specific skills. The interior had been gutted and reinforced with steel plating, creating a mobile fortress designed to transport something, or someone, that needed serious protection. But the modification they wanted was more complex. A false floor that could be opened from inside the vehicle, creating a hidden compartment large enough to hold whatever cargo they needed to move without detection. I worked through the night, cutting and welding and measuring with the precision my father had drilled into me during countless late nights exactly like this one. The work was challenging, requiring mathematical calculations and engineering skills most mechanics never bothered to develop. But I'd always been good at this, at seeing how things fit together, how to solve spatial problems, how to create something from nothing using just tools and determination. By dawn, the van had a false floor so perfectly constructed that even trained customs agents would have trouble detecting it. The seams were invisible, the weight distribution unchanged, the functionality seamless. I stood back and surveyed my work with satisfaction that was immediately complicated by the knowledge of what it would be used for. Smuggling, probably, or human trafficking, or weapons transport, or any of the dozen illegal activities Alexei Morozov's organization undoubtedly engaged in. He arrived just as the sun broke over Brooklyn's skyline, accompanied by the same scarred lieutenant who delivered the Mercedes that first night. Alexei walked around the van slowly, his expression unreadable, running his hands along the false floor, testing the mechanisms, examining every weld and seam with the attention to detail of someone who understood that poor craftsmanship could mean the difference between success and prison. Excellent work. He finally spoke, turning to face me with something that might have been approval in his dark eyes. Better than the last 3 mechanics I hired for jobs like this. Cleaner welds, better engineering, invisible from the outside. What are you going to use it for? The question escaped before I could stop it, before I could remember his warning about not asking questions. Alexei studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he answered. Moving things that need to stay hidden from people who want to find them. Sometimes that's money. Sometimes it's merchandise. Sometimes it's people who've made enemies and need safe passage out of the city. He paused. Does knowing that bother you? It should have. It absolutely should have bothered me. Should have sent me running to the nearest police station with evidence and testimony, and a conscience clear of enabling criminal activity. But standing there in my father's garage at dawn, Exhausted and oil-stained and inexplicably drawn to this dangerous man who'd invaded my life, all I could think was that everyone who came to my father's garage had been running from something or toward something, and who was I to judge whether their reasons were legal or moral or right? "No," I heard myself say. "It doesn't bother me." His smile this time was different. Warmer, almost genuine, like I'd passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. "Good, because I have a feeling we're going to work very well together, Mia Turner." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, thick with cash I didn't need to count to know was far more than any normal mechanic job would pay. "Your first official payment. There will be more jobs like this, more opportunities to prove yourself valuable to my organization." I took the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was accepting. Not just money, but complicity. Not just work, but alliance with a man whose empire was built on violence and crime and fear. "Thank you," I managed, though the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what had just transpired between us. "Don't thank me yet." Alexei moved toward the door, his lieutenant falling into step behind him. "Thank me when you realize I've given you something far more valuable than money." He paused at the threshold, silhouetted against the rising sun. "I've given you power in a world that tried to take everything from you. And power, Mia Turner, is the only thing that matters." The next 2 weeks established a rhythm that felt both surreal and inevitable. During the day, I maintained the fiction of running a normal garage, changing oil, rotating tires, replacing brake pads for the handful of regular customers brave enough to return despite the perpetual presence of Alexei's guards. But at night, after the sun set and Brooklyn's streets filled with shadows, the real work began. A BMW with a trunk modified to hide contraband. A delivery truck with a false ceiling that could transport people across state lines. An armored SUV that needed its interior reinforced enough to withstand small arms fire. Each vehicle arrived with silent men, specific instructions, and deadlines that required me to work through the night, fueled by black coffee, and the adrenaline of knowing that failure wasn't an option when your employer controlled half of New York's criminal underworld. Alexei visited frequently, more frequently than necessary for someone of his position, I began to realize. Sometimes he came to inspect finished work, running his hands over my welds and modifications with the appreciation of someone who understood quality craftsmanship. Sometimes he came with new jobs, spreading blueprints across my father's old workbench and explaining what he needed with the patience of a teacher instructing a particularly promising student. And sometimes, increasingly, he came with nothing but coffee and expensive paper cups, and questions that had nothing to do with engines or mechanics or business. "How did your father teach you all this?" he asked one night around 2 a.m., watching me install a hidden compartment beneath a Range Rover's back seat. He sat on a rolling stool near my toolbox, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with lean muscle and a tattoo of Cyrillic script I couldn't read. I paused my work, considering how much truth to give him. He didn't have a son, so he taught his daughter instead. Started when I was 5 years old, letting me hand him tools. By 8, I could change oil. By 12, I could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. By 16, I was better than most of his employees. "And your mother?" His voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes watched me with that unsettling intensity that made me feel simultaneously exposed and protected. "She left when I was 6. I returned to my work, using the physical labor to avoid his gaze. Said she didn't sign up to be married to a garage, which is what my father had become. Last I heard, she remarried some accountant in New Jersey and pretends she never had a daughter who smells like motor oil." Silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of my drill and the distant sirens that were Brooklyn's constant soundtrack. Then Alexei spoke, his voice lower, rougher than usual. "My mother died when I was 8. Cancer, though we couldn't afford treatment that might have saved her. My father worked for the Bratva, the Russian Brotherhood. doing jobs that kept us fed, but ensured we'd never be safe, never be respected, never be more than expendable tools for men with more power. He paused, and when I looked up, his expression was distant, focused on memories I couldn't see. He died when I was 15. Someone's message carved into his body, left in the snow for us to find. My hands stilled on my tools as his words sank in, not just the facts, but the emotion beneath them, the rare vulnerability from a man who'd built his entire life around appearing invulnerable. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it despite everything, despite knowing this man was dangerous, despite knowing getting close to him was probably the worst decision I could make. "Don't be." His eyes refocused on me, sharp and present again. His death taught me the most important lesson of my life. Power is the only currency that matters. Money can be taken. Love can be betrayed. Family can abandon you. But power, real power, absolute power, that protects you from a world designed to destroy anyone weak enough to show vulnerability. "Is that why you do this?" I gestured vaguely around the garage, encompassing not just the vehicle I was modifying, but his entire criminal empire. "To never be vulnerable again? I do this because I'm good at it." He stood, moving closer until he was standing directly beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see the faint scar along his jaw. "Because I understand that the world is divided into predators and prey, and I decided very young which one I would be. But yes, Mia, part of it is knowing that no one can ever hurt me the way my father was hurt, the way my mother died slowly because we couldn't afford to save her." His hand came up to my face, cupping my jaw with surprising gentleness, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone in a gesture that felt both possessive and tender. "You understand that, don't you? You understand what it means to lose everything and decide you'll do whatever it takes to never lose again." I should have pulled away, should have maintained professional distance, remembered that he was my employer, my captor in all but name, someone capable of unspeakable violence. But standing there in my father's garage with his hand warm against my skin, and his dark eyes looking at me like I was something precious rather than useful, I found myself leaning into his touch instead of away from it. "Yes," I whispered. "I understand." "Good." He leaned closer, his breath warm against my face, his lips hovering so close to mine that I could feel the ghost of contact without actual touch. "Because I need you to understand something else, Mia Turner. You're not just fixing my vehicles anymore. You're not just an employee or an asset or a tool I use when necessary. Then what am I?" My voice came out breathless, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Mine." He said it simply, absolutely, like he was stating a fundamental truth about the universe. "You became mine the moment you fixed that first Mercedes. Mine to protect, mine to provide for, mine to—" He stopped himself, jaw clenching with visible effort at control. "You're mine, Mia, and I protect what's mine more fiercely than anything else in this world." Before I could respond, before I could process what he was saying and what it meant for my life, for my safety, for whatever was building between us in late-night conversations and lingering touches, his phone rang. The shrill sound shattered the moment like glass, and Alexei stepped back immediately, his expression shifting from vulnerable to controlled in the space of a heartbeat. He answered in rapid Russian, his voice hard and commanding, the softness that had been there moments before completely erased. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. Something had gone wrong. Something required his immediate attention. Something more important than whatever had almost happened between us in my garage at 2 a.m. He ended the call and turned back to me, already shrugging into his suit jacket, already transforming back into Alexei Morozov, the crime lord, rather than Alexei, the man who'd just shared pieces of his past I suspected few people knew. "I have to go," Finish the Range Rover tonight. It needs to be ready by dawn." "What happened?" I asked, though I knew he probably wouldn't tell me. Surprisingly, he paused at the garage door. "Someone tried to move against me, stole a shipment, killed 2 of my men." His jaw tightened, something dark and dangerous flickering across his features. "They forgot that I didn't build my empire by being merciful to people who think they can take what's mine." "Be careful," I said before I could stop myself. He looked back at me, and for just a moment, that vulnerability returned to his eyes. "I always am. But Mia?" He held my gaze with intensity that made my breath catch. "Lock the doors after I leave. Don't let anyone in except my men. Don't go anywhere alone. And if anything at all, makes you nervous, you call me immediately." "Why? What's wrong?" "Because if someone's moving against me, they might try to hurt me by hurting the things I—" He stopped himself again, that control slamming back into place. "Just do as I say. Please." Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the garage with a half-finished vehicle and the lingering warmth of his touch on my face, and the terrifying realization that Alexei Morozov had just admitted, in his own carefully controlled way, that I mattered to him. Not as an employee or an asset, but as something more. Something that made me a target. I finished the Range Rover in record time, driven by nervous energy and the fear that Alexei's warning had planted in my chest. By the time his men arrived at dawn to collect the vehicle, I was exhausted, paranoid, jumping at every sound from the street outside. They noticed my state, exchanged glances, and one of them, the lieutenant with the scarred eyebrow I'd started to recognize, spoke in heavily accented English. "Boss said we stay today. Watch you. Keep safe." "Is that necessary?" I tried to sound calm, professional, like I wasn't terrified of invisible threats I didn't understand. "Boss says necessary is necessary." He positioned himself at the bay door while his partner disappeared around the building's exterior. "You work, we watch," is simple. But it wasn't simple. Nothing about my life had been simple since that first Mercedes arrived at my garage in the middle of the night. I tried to work. Mrs. Chen had finally returned with her Honda needing a new alternator. But I couldn't focus, couldn't stop my hands from shaking, couldn't silence the voice in my head that kept replaying Alexei's words. "I protect what's mine more fiercely than anything else in this world." The attack came at noon, when the sun was high and the neighborhood was full of people who would later tell police they saw nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing about what happened at Turner's Auto Repair that Tuesday afternoon. I was under Mrs. Chen's Honda, installing the alternator, when I heard the screech of tires and the sharp crack of gunfire. My body moved on instinct, rolling out from under the vehicle and scrambling toward my father's office at the back of the garage, the only room with a solid door and a lock that still worked. More gunshots, closer now, and then shouts in Russian from Alexei's guards. I slammed the office door closed and locked it with trembling fingers, my heart hammering so hard against my ribs I thought they might crack. Through the door's small window, I could see chaos. 3 men I didn't recognize firing at Alexei's guards, who returned fire from behind vehicles and equipment. Bullets punched through sheet metal and shattered windshields and ricocheted off concrete with sounds that would haunt my nightmares. One of Alexei's guards went down, blood blooming across his chest. The other one, the lieutenant with the scarred eyebrow, kept fighting, but he was outnumbered, outgunned, falling back toward my father's office while the attackers advanced. This was it, I realized with crystal clarity. They were going to kill Alexei's men, and then they were going to kill me, because I was part of Alexei's organization now whether I wanted to be or not. The office door shuddered under a massive impact that made me scream. Another impact, and I could see the wood splintering around the lock. I grabbed the only weapon available, a heavy wrench from my father's desk, and pressed myself against the wall beside the door, ready to fight even though I knew it was useless. Knew I was going to die in this garage just like my father had, both of us victims of a world too violent for the innocent. Then the shooting stopped. Sudden, complete silence that was somehow more terrifying than the gunfire had been. I held my breath, gripping the wrench with white knuckles, waiting for the door to burst open, waiting for my death. Mia. Alexei's voice, controlled but with an undercurrent of something raw, something close to panic. Mia, it's me. Open the door. My legs nearly gave out from relief. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the mechanism, and then the door swung open and Alexei was there, alive, unharmed, with blood on his hands that I instinctively knew wasn't his. He pulled me out of the office, out of the garage filled with bodies and broken glass, and the acrid smell of gunpowder, and into the back of his Mercedes, where his driver was already gunning the engine. I was shaking so hard my teeth chattered, shock setting in now that the immediate danger had passed, my mind unable to process what had just happened. You're okay. Alexei pulled me against his chest, his arms wrapping around me with fierce protectiveness. You're okay, Mia. I've got you. You're safe now. Your men, I managed through chattering teeth. Dead. His voice was cold, controlled, but his arms tightened around me. All of them dead because they protected you instead of running. Because I gave them orders that keeping you safe was more important than their own lives. Why? I pulled back enough to look at his face, to see the carefully controlled fury in his dark eyes. Why am I worth men dying for? Because, he said, his hand coming up to cup my face with hands still stained with blood. You're mine. And I told you, Mia, I protect what's mine more fiercely than anything else in this world. Alexei took me to a building in Manhattan I'd never seen before, a high-rise in Tribeca with the kind of security that made Fort Knox look casual. Armed guards in the lobby who knew him on sight, biometric scanners on the private elevator, and a penthouse apartment that occupied the entire top floor with views of the city that probably cost more per month than I'd made in my entire life. You're staying here until I eliminate the threat. He guided me inside with a hand on the small of my back, his touch possessive and protective in equal measure. Don't argue with me about this, Mia. Those men came to my garage specifically to hurt you, to hurt me through you. That means you're not safe anywhere I can't personally protect you. The apartment was exactly what I would have expected if I'd ever thought about where a Russian mafia boss lived. All dark wood and leather furniture, expensive art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's glittering landscape. But there were unexpected touches, too. Books in both Russian and English, filling built-in shelves, a guitar leaning against one wall, photographs of a young boy and woman who must have been Alexei and his mother before cancer and poverty had stolen her away. Make yourself comfortable. He moved to the bar in the corner, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses with practiced ease. You'll find clothes in the guest bedroom that should fit. I had someone purchase appropriate sizes while we were driving. He handed me a glass, his fingers brushing mine in a way that made electricity spark up my arm. Drink. It'll help with the shock. I took the glass but didn't drink immediately, too busy processing the fact that Alexei Morozov had prepared for my arrival, had purchased clothes in my size, had planned for this possibility even before the attack happened. You knew they might come after me. I suspected. He drank his own liquor in one smooth motion, his jaw tight. Moving against me directly is suicide. I'm too well protected, too established, too feared. But hurting someone I care about. His eyes found mine across the expensive apartment. That sends a message. That tells everyone watching that Alexei Morozov has a weakness. And I'm that weakness. It wasn't a question. You are. He set down his glass and moved toward me with predatory grace, closing the distance until we were standing close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. which means I need to decide what to do about that. Eliminate the weakness, or eliminate everyone who might try to exploit it. My heart hammered against my ribs, fear and something darker twisting in my stomach. And which option are you choosing? His hand came up to my face, fingers trailing along my jaw with unexpected gentleness. What do you think, Mia? Do you really believe I brought you here, to my personal sanctuary, to eliminate you? His thumb brushed across my lower lip, the touch sending heat flooding through my body despite the circumstances. I'm going to eliminate every person who thinks they can hurt what's mine. Every single one. The way he said it, controlled, absolute, promising violence, should have terrified me. Instead, standing in his penthouse with his hand on my face and his dark eyes burning with possessive intensity, I felt something else entirely. Safety. Protection. The certainty that this dangerous man would burn the world down before he let anyone hurt me. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why do you care so much? I'm just a mechanic, just someone who fixes your cars. I'm nothing special, nothing worth... You're everything. He cut me off, his voice rough with an emotion I'd never heard from him before. You're brilliant and brave and stubborn enough to stand your ground when men twice your size try to intimidate you. You fix broken things with your hands and your mind, and your absolutely infuriating refusal to give up even when you should. You looked at me that first morning, covered in oil and exhaustion, and you didn't flinch, didn't show fear, didn't back down. His other hand came up to frame my face, holding me captive with his gaze and his touch. And you make me feel like I'm more than just the monster I've become. Like there's still something human left inside me worth saving. Alexei. His name on my lips felt intimate, dangerous, like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. I know it's wrong. His forehead pressed against mine, his breath warm on my face. I know I shouldn't feel this way about you. Shouldn't want you the way I do. Shouldn't need you like I need air to breathe. You deserve better than a man whose hands are stained with blood, whose empire is built on violence and fear. But God help me, Mia. I can't let you go. Won't let you go. You're mine now, whether you chose it or not. His lips brushed against mine. Not quite a kiss, just the ghost of contact that made my entire body ignite with want I'd been trying to deny since that first dawn encounter. Tell me to stop, he breathed against my mouth. Tell me you don't want this, that you don't feel what I feel, and I'll step back. I'll keep you safe, keep you protected, but I'll maintain distance. Just say the words, Mia. I should have said them. Should have maintained the boundaries that were already so dangerously blurred between us. Should have remembered that Alexei Morozov was a criminal, a killer, someone whose life was measured in violence and risk, but standing there with his hands on my face and his forehead pressed to mine, and his breath mingling with mine in the space between us. All I could think about was how much I wanted him to close that final distance, to kiss me properly, to show me that the darkness I'd glimpsed beneath his control was matched by something deeper, something human, something worth saving. I can't, I whispered, my hands coming up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer instead of pushing him away. I can't tell you to stop, Alexei. God help me, I don't want you to stop. That was all the permission he needed. His mouth crashed against mine with barely controlled intensity, his hands tangling in my hair, his body pressing me back against the window with desperate need. I kissed him back with equal fervor, my fingers working at the buttons of his shirt, needing to feel his skin, needing confirmation that he was real and alive and mine in the same way he claimed I was his. We moved through the apartment in a tangle of desperate touches and shed clothing, leaving a trail from the living room to his bedroom like evidence of temporary insanity. His bed was massive, covered in expensive sheets that felt like silk against my overheated skin, as he laid me down with surprising gentleness, given the hunger burning in his eyes. "You're sure?" He paused, hovering over me, giving me one last chance to change my mind. "Once we do this, Mia, there's no going back. You'll be mine in every way that matters, and I'll be yours just as completely. No running, no pretending this is just physical, no easy escape from what we're building. I'm sure." I pulled him down to me, sealing my fate with another kiss that tasted like surrender and claiming in equal measure. "I'm yours, Alexei. Completely yours." What happened next was both tender and intense, gentle and desperate, a collision of need and emotion that left us both gasping and trembling in the aftermath. Alexei touched me like I was something precious he was afraid to break, kissed me like I was oxygen he needed to survive, moved inside me with controlled passion that gradually gave way to something rawer, more honest, more human than anything I'd imagined from a man known for cold calculation. Afterward, we lay tangled together in his expensive sheets, while Manhattan glittered outside his windows, his arm wrapped around me possessively, my head resting on his chest, where I could hear his heart beating steady and strong beneath my ear. "I need to tell you something." His voice rumbled through his chest, serious and careful. "About the attack today, about who's moving against me and why." I traced patterns on his skin with my fingertips, feeling the lean muscle and old scars that mapped a lifetime of violence. "I'm listening." "There's a man named Viktor Sokolov. We grew up together in Moscow, came to America together, built our organization together from nothing." His jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his skin. 5 years ago, he decided my leadership was holding us back, that I was too cautious, too strategic, not aggressive enough. He tried to take control, to turn my own men against me. "What happened?" "I exiled him. Should have killed him, but I let sentiment cloud my judgment. We'd been brothers once, before ambition poisoned him." His arm tightened around me. "Now he's returned, built his own organization, and he's trying to take everything I've built. Today's attack was his first real move against me, his way of announcing he's done hiding in the shadows. And he targeted me specifically because he knows you matter to me." Alexei's hand cupped my face, turning me to look at him. "Because in our world, love is the greatest weakness, the surest way to destroy even the most powerful man. Victor thinks hurting you will hurt me, will make me reckless, will give him an opening to strike. And will it?" I searched his dark eyes for truth. "Will protecting me make you vulnerable?" "Probably." His smile was grim, honest. "But I don't care, Mia. You're worth the risk, worth the vulnerability, worth fighting every enemy who thinks they can use you against me." He kissed me softly, tenderly. "I'm going to end this threat, going to eliminate Victor and everyone loyal to him. And then you'll be safe to return to your garage, to your life, to the normalcy you deserve." "I don't want normalcy." The words surprised me even as I spoke them, but they felt true, felt right. "Not anymore. Whatever this is between us, whatever we're building, I want it, want you, even knowing the danger, even understanding what being yours means." "You say that now, while we're safe in my penthouse." His expression was troubled, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "But when the reality of my world fully hits you, when you understand the violence and moral compromise required to survive in it, you might feel differently." I pushed myself up on one elbow, looking down at him with all the certainty I could muster. My father spent 20 years in that garage serving criminals, fixing vehicles for people who use them in ways that hurt others. I grew up understanding that survival sometimes means making choices that aren't black and white, that aren't clearly right or wrong. I chose you, Alexei, knowing what you are, knowing what you do. And I'll keep choosing you." Something in his expression cracked, that control slipping enough for me to see the man beneath. Lonely, scarred, desperate for connection, he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. He pulled me down to him, kissing me with a tenderness that felt like a promise and a prayer in equal measure. "Then stay," he breathed against my lips. "Stay with me while I eliminate this threat. Stay after, when it's safe again. Stay because you want to, not because you have to. Be mine, Mia, in every way that matters." "I'm already yours," I whispered back. "I have been since that first morning, since you walked into my garage and looked at me like I was something precious rather than useful. I'm yours, Alexei Morozov. Completely, absolutely yours." 3 days in Alexei's penthouse taught me things about the man I'd thought I understood but had barely scratched the surface of. He left early each morning, dressed in his immaculate suits with death in his eyes, to orchestrate whatever violence was necessary to eliminate Viktor Sokolov's threat. But he returned each evening transformed. Still dangerous, still powerful, but softer somehow, more human. Shedding the armor of Alexei Morozov, the crime lord, to become simply Alexei, the man who cooked surprisingly good pasta, who played guitar with calloused fingers, who held me through nightmares about gunfire and blood. The guards stationed throughout the building, discreet but omnipresent, told me everything I needed to know about how seriously Alexei took my safety. I couldn't leave without an armed escort, couldn't even order food without it being screened by his security team, couldn't exist outside the protective bubble he'd constructed around me with military precision. I should have felt trapped, imprisoned, suffocated by the control he exerted over every aspect of my life. Instead, I felt cherished, protected, valued in a way I'd never experienced before. Like I was something worth the considerable expense and effort Alexei invested in keeping me safe. On the 4th morning, I woke to find Alexei already dressed, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Russian in a tone that made my stomach clench with apprehension. When he ended the call, he turned to me with an expression I couldn't read, triumph mixed with something darker, something final. "It's done." He moved to the bed, sitting on the edge beside me. "Victor and his inner circle are dead. The threat is eliminated." Relief should have flooded through me, but instead I felt only concern for the darkness I could see in Alexei's eyes, the weight of whatever he'd done to protect me. "How many?" I asked quietly, taking his hand in mine. "Does it matter?" His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain beneath it. "They threatened you, Mia. They tried to hurt you to hurt me. I did what was necessary." "How many, Alexei?" I repeated, squeezing his hand. He met my gaze, and for a moment I saw the full weight of what he'd become, the violence he'd embraced to build his empire and protect what mattered to him. 17. Victor and 16 of his most loyal men, all dead by dawn. 17 lives ended because of me, because I mattered to this dangerous man who'd claimed me as his own. I should have felt horror, revulsion, moral outrage at the casual way he discussed mass murder. Instead, I felt only gratitude that he'd survived, that he'd eliminated the threat, that we could finally stop looking over our shoulders. "Come here." I pulled him down to me, wrapping my arms around him with all the strength I possessed. "You're safe. I'm safe. It's over." It's never truly over in my world. But he held me just as tightly, his face buried in my hair, his body trembling slightly with the aftermath of violence and fear. There will always be another Victor, another threat, another person who thinks they can take what's mine. That's the price of power, Mia. Constant vigilance, constant readiness to destroy anyone who challenges you. Then we'll face them together. I pulled back enough to look at his face, to show him I meant every word. You're not alone anymore, Alexei. Whatever comes next, whatever threats emerge, you have me. You have someone who sees you, all of you, and chooses to stay anyway. His kiss was desperate, grateful, tinged with something that felt like worship. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were wet with tears he'd probably never shed in front of another living soul. "I love you," he said, the words rough and unpracticed, like he'd never spoken them before in his entire life. "God help me, Mia. I love you more than I've ever loved anything. More than power, more than empire, more than my own life. I love you too." The admission should have terrified me, should have felt like the final surrender of everything I'd been before meeting him. Instead, it felt like freedom. Permission to stop fighting what had been building between us since that first dawn encounter. Permission to embrace something real and precious despite its impossibility. I love you, Alexei. Completely. Irrevocably. We spent that day wrapped around each other, alternating between desperate physical need and quiet conversations about futures we'd never imagined possible before. Alexei talked about expanding his legitimate businesses, about using his empire's resources for something beyond crime, about the possibility of building something clean alongside the darkness that had defined him. I talked about modernizing the garage, about teaching other young women the skills my father had taught me, about creating a legacy beyond just survival. They were fantasies, probably. The dreams of people who wanted to believe they could have normal lives despite the violence that had brought them together. But they felt possible in the safety of Alexei's penthouse, in the cocoon we'd built against reality, in the space between one threat ending and the next beginning. On the 5th day, Alexei declared it safe enough for me to return to the garage. He drove me himself, his Mercedes pulling up in front of Turner's Auto Repair like nothing had changed, like the attack had never happened. But everything had changed, I realized as I stepped out of the car and saw my garage with new eyes. The bullet holes had been repaired, the blood cleaned, the broken glass replaced. But more than that, the garage had been upgraded. New equipment I'd never been able to afford sat in gleaming rows. Top-of-the-line diagnostic computers, state-of-the-art lifts, tools that would have taken me years to save for. A small office had been added to the back, with a desk and filing cabinets, and a coffee maker that looked like it cost more than my rent. Alexei, I turned to him, overwhelmed, not sure if I wanted to thank him or yell at him for the presumption. This is too much. I can't accept. You can, and you will. He pulled me against him, his hands settling on my hips with possessive certainty. Consider it an investment in my favorite mechanic. Besides, his smile turned wicked. I need somewhere to take my vehicles when they require your particular expertise, and I prefer that place to be properly equipped. Your vehicles. I raised an eyebrow, playing along. Is that what we're calling them? Among other things. He kissed me thoroughly, publicly, claiming me in front of anyone who might be watching. But yes, I'll continue to need your services, Mia Turner. Your mechanical expertise, your discretion, your brilliance at solving impossible problems. And will I be fairly compensated for these services? I asked, running my hands up his chest, feeling the lean muscle beneath his expensive suit. Extremely fairly. His eyes darkened with heat that had nothing to do with business, both financially and in other more personal ways. We were interrupted by the arrival of 2 vehicles, a familiar black Mercedes and a new silver Lexus. 4 men emerged, including the lieutenant with the scarred eyebrow who'd helped protect me during the attack. He approached with his usual stoic expression, though I thought I detected the faintest hint of approval in his eyes. "Boss," he said in his heavily accented English. "The new security protocols are in place. 4 men on rotation, cameras covering all approaches, direct line to headquarters. She'll be safe here." "Good." Alexei's arm remained around my waist, keeping me tucked against his side. "And Dmitri?" He waited until the lieutenant met his gaze. "Thank you for protecting her, for following my orders even when it meant risking your life." The lieutenant, Dmitri apparently, nodded once. "She matters to you. That makes her matter to all of us." His eyes shifted to me briefly. "Welcome to the family, Miss Turner." The casual acceptance, the acknowledgement that I was now part of Alexei's organization, not just as an employee, but as something more precious, made emotion tighten my throat. These dangerous men, these killers who worked for a criminal empire, had accepted me, protected me, considered me worth dying for because their boss loved me. After they left to take up their guard positions, Alexei and I stood alone in my transformed garage, surrounded by new equipment and old memories, trying to find our footing in this new reality we'd created together. "I need to ask you something." Alexei's voice was serious, his expression troubled. "And I need you to answer honestly, without worrying about my feelings or your safety or anything except the truth." "Okay." Nervousness fluttered in my stomach, but I kept my voice steady. "Do you regret this? Any of it?" His hands framed my face, his dark eyes searching mine with desperate intensity. "Meeting me, getting pulled into my world, becoming mine? Because I'll understand if you do, Mia. I'll understand if you wish I'd never walked into your garage that morning. If you wish you'd refused to fix that first Mercedes. If you wish you'd chosen safety over whatever this is between us." I took a moment to truly consider his question, to examine the past 2 weeks with complete honesty. The fear, the violence, the moral compromises, the danger that would always shadow my life now that I'd chosen Alexei Morozov. And against that, the connection, the passion, the certainty that this man would burn the world down to keep me safe, the feeling of being cherished and valued and loved with an intensity I'd never imagined possible. "No." I pulled his face down to mine, looking directly into his eyes so he could see the truth. "I don't regret any of it. Not meeting you, not fixing your cars, not falling in love with you despite knowing better. You're the best decision I never meant to make, Alexei. The beautiful mistake that became my entire world." His kiss was soft, reverent, filled with relief and love and promises for a future that would be complicated and dangerous and absolutely worth fighting for. When he pulled away, he pressed his forehead to mine and breathed words against my lips that felt like a vow. "Then I promise you this, Mia Turner. I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth the risk you took on me. Worth the danger, worth the compromise, worth choosing darkness over safety. You fixed my cars, but you fixed something infinitely more broken. You fixed me, made me human again, made me believe I could be more than just the monster I'd become. You were never just a monster." I held his face in my oil-stained hands, this dangerous man who'd become my entire world. "You were always human, Alexei. Always worth saving. I just helped you remember that." We stood there in my father's garage, 2 broken people who'd found wholeness in each other, building something precious from violence and fear and love that defied every rule about how these stories should end. It wasn't safe, wasn't simple, wasn't the fairy tale I'd imagined as a child. But it was real, and it was ours. And it was worth everything. The next 4 months established a rhythm that felt both sustainable and surreal. I ran Turner's Auto Repair during the day, legitimately now, with my regular customers gradually returning once word spread that the trouble had passed. Mrs. Chen brought her Honda back for routine maintenance. Mr. Rodriguez started scheduling his truck for oil changes again. And slowly, carefully, my father's legacy began to thrive in ways it never had when he was alive. But the nights belonged to Alexei and his world. I modified vehicles for his organization, solved mechanical problems that required both engineering brilliance and absolute discretion, became known throughout Brooklyn's criminal underworld as the mechanic who could fix anything, and never asked questions. The money was extraordinary, enough that I paid off my father's debts within 3 months, enough that I could afford to hire 2 legitimate employees, enough that I started sleeping without nightmares about eviction notices and utility shutoffs. Alexei was careful with me in ways I hadn't expected. He never involved me in the violence directly, never brought his bloody work into my garage, never asked me to compromise more than I already had by accepting his world. He kept those aspects of his life separate, contained, like he was trying to preserve some small part of my innocence, even as we both knew it was too late for that kind of protection. We settled into domesticity in moments between danger, dinners in his penthouse, late-night conversations about everything and nothing, his guitar music filling comfortable silences while I sketched engine designs on graph paper. He taught me Russian phrases that made his men laugh. I taught him the difference between torque and horsepower, in terms that finally made sense to someone who'd never held a wrench. We built a life together from impossible materials, and somehow, miraculously, it worked. But the peace was always temporary in Alexei's world. The warning came on a Tuesday evening in June, when summer heat had turned Brooklyn into a sweatbox, and I was closing up the garage after a long day. Dmitri appeared in the bay door with his usual stoic expression replaced by something urgent, almost worried. "Miss Turner, you need to come with me now." His hand was already on his weapon, his eyes scanning the street like he expected attack at any moment. "Boss's orders. Situation has developed." My stomach dropped, but I'd learned not to argue with Alexei's security protocols. I grabbed my bag, locked up the garage, and followed Dmitri to the waiting Mercedes. 2 other vehicles fell into formation around us as we drove, creating a moving fortress that told me whatever situation had developed was serious enough to merit maximum protection. Alexei was waiting in his penthouse office when I arrived. Not the main living space I'd come to know, but a separate room I'd only glimpsed before, filled with monitors and communications equipment and maps of the city marked with symbols I didn't fully understand. He was on the phone when I entered, speaking rapid Russian in a tone that made the hair on my arms stand up with primitive fear. When he saw me, relief flooded his features so completely, it was almost painful to witness. He ended his call immediately and crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling me into his arms with desperate intensity. What happened? I held him just as tightly, feeling the tension vibrating through his powerful frame. "Alexei, talk to me. What's wrong?" "The Italians." He pulled back enough to look at my face, his hands coming up to frame my jaw with trembling fingers. "They've been watching you, Mia. Watching us. And they've decided you're their opening to move against me. To take territory they think I've left vulnerable while focusing on you." "So, what does that mean?" I tried to keep my voice steady, tried not to show the fear crawling up my spine. "More guards? Different security protocols?" "It means they're planning to take you." His eyes were dark with barely controlled fury and fear. "Intercepted communications indicate they're going to try to kidnap you, use you as leverage to force my hand, to make me choose between you and my empire. Then increase security, keep guards on me at all times. I'll stay here until the threat passes." "It won't pass." He cut me off, his voice rough. "This is different from Victor, Mia. The Italians are more established, more powerful, more patient. They'll wait months if necessary, years even, for the perfect opportunity. And as long as you're with me, as long as everyone knows you matter to me, you'll be a target. Always." The implication of his words sank in slowly, like ice water through my veins. "You're saying I need to leave, go into hiding or witness protection, or—" "I'm saying you need to choose." His hands tightened on my face, his eyes burning with intensity that bordered on desperation. "Choose the life you deserve. Safe, normal, free from constant danger. Or choose me, knowing that means accepting this threat, and every threat that follows means living with guards and protocols, and the constant knowledge that people will try to hurt you to hurt me." That's not a choice. I gripped his wrists, holding his hands against my face. That's you asking me to choose between air and water, between two things I need to survive. I know. His voice cracked slightly, that control fracturing. God, Mia, I know. And if I were a better man, a stronger man, I'd make the choice for you. I'd send you away, protect you by distance, ensure your safety even if it destroyed me. But I'm not that man. I'm selfish and weak and desperate enough to hope you'll choose me anyway. Despite knowing better, I studied his face. This dangerous, powerful man who'd become my entire world, who loved me with an intensity that was both blessing and curse. Then I thought about my life before him. Lonely, exhausting, constantly struggling to survive while honoring my father's memory. And my life after him. Still dangerous, still complicated, but filled with purpose and passion and love that made every risk worthwhile. There's no choice to make. I pulled his face down to mine, kissing him with all the certainty I possessed. I chose you that first morning, Alexei. I chose you when I fixed your Mercedes knowing something was wrong with how it arrived. I chose you when I accepted your work instead of running. I chose you when I fell in love with you despite every logical reason not to. And I choose you now, knowing that means living with danger, living with guards, living with the knowledge that I'm a target. Mia. My name came out as something between a prayer and a plea. I'm not done. I held his gaze, making sure he understood. I choose you because you make me feel alive in ways I never knew possible. Because you look at me like I'm something precious, rather than useful. Because you've given me not just security but purpose, not just protection, but partnership. Because when I'm with you, I'm not just James Turner's daughter trying to honor his memory. I'm Mia Turner, mechanic and lover and partner to the most powerful man in Brooklyn. His kiss was desperate, grateful, tinged with relief so profound it was almost painful. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were wet with tears I knew he'd never shed in front of anyone else. Then we do this right. His voice was controlled again, but beneath it I could hear the emotion threatening to break free. Maximum security, enhanced protocols, anything and everything necessary to keep you safe. You don't go anywhere without armed escort. You don't make a move without my knowledge. You become so protected that even thinking about hurting you becomes suicide for anyone who tries. That sounds suffocating. I tried to smile, to lighten the mood despite the seriousness of what we were discussing. It'll be a prison. He was honest, brutally so. A gilded cage where I'm your jailer as much as your protector. You'll hate it sometimes, hate me sometimes, hate the restrictions and control and constant surveillance. But you'll be alive, Mia, safe, mine, and I'll spend every day proving I'm worth the sacrifice you're making. It's not a sacrifice. I cupped his face in my hands, this dangerous man who'd become my entire world. It's a choice, my choice, and I'd make it again every day for the rest of my life. The next morning, Alexei assembled his entire organization at a warehouse in Red Hook. Over 100 men, all loyal to him, all dangerous in their own right. I stood beside him on a raised platform while he addressed them in Russian and English, making his intentions crystal clear. This woman, he said, his arm around my waist, his voice carrying absolute authority, is mine, my partner, my lover, my future. And as of today, she has the same protection as me. The same respect, the same authority. Anyone who threatens her threatens me. Anyone who harms her has declared war on my entire organization. Anyone who even thinks about using her against me will learn exactly why I control half of New York. The assembled men, hardened criminals, killers, enforcers, looked at me with new eyes. Not as just the mechanic who fixed their vehicles, but as someone who mattered. someone worth protecting, someone who'd earned their loyalty by earning their boss's love. Dmitri stepped forward, speaking in heavily accented but clear English, so everyone understood. We protect boss because he protects us. He gives us purpose, gives us power, gives us family. Now his family is our family. Miss Turner is under our protection, same as boss. Anyone disagrees can leave now. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was absolute acceptance. Later, in the privacy of Alexei's Mercedes, as his driver navigated us back to Manhattan, I finally asked the question that had been building since his speech. What happens now? How do we actually live with this level of threat? Carefully. His arm was around me, keeping me tucked against his side. You keep running the garage. That's non-negotiable. I won't take that from you. But with enhanced security. Armored glass, reinforced doors, guards who actually look like mechanics, so your legitimate customers don't get scared away. You keep fixing my vehicles, but I screen every job personally to ensure it's not a setup. And you keep loving me, despite everything, despite the danger, despite the cage I'm building around you. That last part's easy. I turned in his arms, straddling his lap despite the confined space, needing to look at his face while I said this. Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done, Alexei. Everything else, the danger, the restrictions, the constant awareness that I'm a target, that's just the price of admission. And you're worth it. Worth everything. His hands settled on my hips, holding me against him with possessive certainty. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that decision. I know. I leaned down and kissed him, soft and slow and full of promises for a future that would be complicated and dangerous and absolutely worth fighting for. Because that's who you are, Alexei Morozov. You protect what's yours more fiercely than anything else in this world. And I'm yours, completely, irrevocably yours. 3 months later, on a September evening when Brooklyn's heat had finally broken into something manageable, I was closing up the garage when I noticed something wrong with the BMW I'd been working on. Not mechanically wrong, something about the way it sat, the way its weight distribution seemed off, the way my instincts, honed by months of working on vehicles that often hid dangerous secrets, screamed that something wasn't right. I opened the trunk carefully, using the caution Alexei had drilled into me about checking vehicles before assuming they were safe. Inside, instead of the spare tire and jack I expected, I found a package wrapped in brown paper with my name written across it in elegant script I'd never seen before. My hands trembled as I opened it, my mind cataloging escape routes and weapon locations even as I told myself this was probably paranoia. Inside was a photograph. Me, walking into my garage that morning, taken from across the street with professional precision. And beneath it, a note written in precise English. Beautiful work you do, Miss Turner. Such talented hands. It would be a shame if something happened to them. Consider this a professional courtesy. 1 week to convince your Russian to negotiate, or we start taking pieces of what he loves. Starting with you. GC. The paper fluttered from my hands as panic seized my chest. They'd been inside my garage, inside my father's legacy, that Alexei had transformed into a fortress. They'd gotten past all the security, all the protocols, all the supposedly impenetrable defenses, and left me a threat so direct it left no room for misinterpretation. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed Alexei. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting for my call, like some instinct had told him something was wrong. Mia, what happened? Talk to me. They were here. My voice came out steadier than I felt, years of learning to appear calm under pressure serving me even now. Inside the garage. They left a message, a photograph, a threat. Alexei, they got past everything. How did they... I'm coming. His voice had shifted to something cold, lethal, absolutely controlled. Dimitri is 2 minutes away. He'll secure you until I arrive. Don't touch anything else. Don't move anything. And Mia..." He paused, and I could hear the fear beneath his control. "Stay where I can see you on the cameras. Don't leave my sight for even a second." Dimitri arrived in 90 seconds, not 2 minutes, with 4 other men who immediately began sweeping the garage for any additional threats. I stood frozen in the center of my workspace, surrounded by machines I'd fixed and tools I'd used, feeling violated in a way that made my hands shake with rage as much as fear. Alexei arrived 10 minutes later in a screech of tires and a thunder of footsteps. He took one look at the photograph and note, and something in his expression shifted. Not to anger, though that was there, but to something colder, more dangerous, absolutely final. Gennady Corvino. He said the name like a curse, his jaw so tight I could see the muscle jumping. The old man himself, not one of his underbosses. He's making this personal. Who? I moved to stand beside him, needing his solid presence, even though part of me wanted to rage at him for failing to keep me safe, for letting them get this close. Head of the Italian families in New York. Alexei's arm came around me automatically, pulling me against his side, even as his eyes stayed fixed on the threat. 73 years old, been running his organization since before I was born. Smart, patient, ruthless. And he's declaring war by threatening you directly, rather than going through intermediaries. So what do? I tried to keep the tremor out of my voice, tried to be strong for him even though I was terrified. We end this. He looked down at me, his dark eyes burning with love and fury and absolute determination. Tonight, we end Gennady Corvino and anyone loyal to him. We eliminate every person who thinks they can threaten what's mine and live to boast about it. No. The word came out firm, certain, cutting through his building rage. Not tonight. Not like this, rushing in angry and reckless. Mia, listen to me. I turned in his arms, forcing him to look at my face, to see the certainty there. You told me once that power comes from being smart, being strategic, being patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. This isn't that moment, Alexei. This is them trying to make you reckless, trying to push you into action before you're ready. Don't give them what they want. His jaw clenched, his entire body vibrating with the need for violence, for revenge, for immediate action to protect what was his. But slowly, gradually, I watched him regain control. Watched that strategic mind reassert itself over instinctive rage. You're right. The admission seemed to cost him, but he made it anyway. God, you're right. This is a test, a manipulation, an attempt to make me act emotionally rather than strategically. He pulled me tighter against him, his face buried in my hair. But Mia, they threatened you. Put their hands on what's mine. I can't let that stand. You won't. I held him just as tightly, this dangerous man who loved me enough to listen to reason even when every instinct screamed for blood. But we'll do it right. We'll plan. We'll prepare. And when we move against Gennady Corvino, it'll be so complete, so devastating, that no one ever threatens us again. 3 days later, I sat in Alexei's penthouse office surrounded by maps and surveillance photos and detailed plans that represented weeks of intelligence gathering his organization had been conducting in preparation for exactly this scenario. Alexei stood at the head of the conference table, surrounded by his most trusted men, outlining a strategy so comprehensive it made military campaigns look simple. 3 simultaneous strikes, he was saying, his finger tracing lines on the map of Brooklyn and Manhattan. Corvino's headquarters, his son's operation in Queens, and his financial center in Staten Island. We hit everything at once, eliminate the old guard and anyone too loyal to bend the knee, and we absorb the rest into our organization. By dawn, the Italian families answer to me or they're dead. That's a war. One of his underbosses, A man named Sergei I'd met several times, looked nervous. That's declaring war on every Italian operation in New York. They declared war when they threatened her. Alexei's voice was absolute, final. When they got past my security and left threats in her workspace. When they decided my love was a weakness they could exploit. Now they learn what happens when you mistake my humanity for vulnerability. The men around the table exchanged glances, then nodded one by one. This was their world, I realized, violence and strategy and loyalty tested in blood. And Alexei was offering them the chance to eliminate their greatest competition, to expand their territory, to prove their loyalty by protecting what their boss loved most. There's one more thing. Alexei's eyes found mine across the table. Mia comes with me to Corvino's headquarters. Not because I need her there, not because she'll participate in the violence, but because I want Gennady Corvino to see her face as he dies. I want him to know that threatening what's mine was the last mistake he'll ever make. Alexei. I started to protest, to argue that putting me in danger to make a point was exactly the kind of emotional decision he'd warned against. No. His tone left no room for argument. You deserve to see this, Mia. Deserve to watch the man who threatened you pay for that mistake. Deserve to know with absolute certainty that I will always protect what's mine no matter the cost. So I went. I sat in the back of Alexei's Mercedes as we drove to Gennady Corvino's headquarters in Red Hook, an old warehouse the Italian families had operated out of for 3 generations. I was surrounded by armed men, protected by enough firepower to start a small war, but all I could focus on was Alexei's hand in mine, his thumb tracing circles on my palm with unexpected gentleness, given what we were driving toward. The attack was swift, brutal, and devastatingly effective. Alexei's men moved with military precision, overwhelming Corvino's defenses before the old Italian even knew he was under attack. By the time Alexei and I entered the warehouse, stepping over bodies and broken resistance, it was essentially over. Gennady Corvino sat in his office chair, bleeding from a shoulder wound, surrounded by the bodies of his personal guards, facing the reality that his empire had just been dismantled in under 20 minutes. He was old, older than I'd expected, with white hair and weathered features that spoke of 7 decades of violence and power. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating, still searching for angles and advantages even in defeat. Alexei Morozov. His voice was rough but steady, accented with decades of Brooklyn Italian. I underestimated you. Thought making it personal would make you reckless. Instead, you became surgical. You threatened her. Alexei's voice was cold, empty of emotion. You put your hands in my world, left your filth in her workspace, thought my love for her was a weakness you could exploit. You forgot the most important lesson of our world, Gennady. Love isn't weakness. It's the fuel that turns men into monsters when threatened. Corvino's eyes shifted to me, taking in my presence with calculating assessment. So this is the mechanic, the woman worth starting a war over. I have to say, Morozov, I didn't think you had it in you. Thought you were too strategic, too controlled, too smart to let a woman compromise your empire. She didn't compromise anything. Alexei's hand found my back, keeping me close. She completed it. Made me human enough to care, powerful enough to protect, ruthless enough to destroy anyone who threatens what's mine. You were right that she matters to me, Gennady. You were just wrong about what that means. It means... I found myself speaking, my voice steady despite the violence surrounding us. That Alexei Morozov has something worth protecting more than money or territory or power. And a man with something worth protecting is more dangerous than a man with nothing to lose. Corvino laughed, a wet sound that brought blood to his lips. Smart girl. I can see why he loves you. In another life, different circumstances, I might have respected what you've built together. His eyes shifted back to Alexei. But you know this doesn't end here. Taking out the old guard just makes room for ambitious young men to rise up, to test you, to try their own luck at exploiting your weakness. Let them try. Alexei's voice was absolutely certain. Let everyone watching this moment understand exactly what happens when you threaten Mia Turner. Let the story spread through every organization in New York, every family in Brooklyn, every ambitious criminal who thinks they can use love against me. Let them all know that touching what's mine is suicide. He pulled out his weapon. A gesture so casual, so practiced, it barely registered as the threat it was. Any last words, Gennady? The old Italian looked at me one more time, something like approval in his eyes despite everything. You fix things, girl. Broken cars, broken men, broken situations. That's a rare gift in our world. Use it well. Then his eyes shifted to Alexei. Make it quick, Morozov. Professional courtesy for a worthy opponent. Of course. Alexei's voice was almost gentle. Nothing personal, Gennady. Just business. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, final and absolute. Gennady Corvino slumped in his chair, dead before his body finished falling. And with him died the last major threat to what Alexei and I were building. Not the last threat ever, as Corvino had predicted, but the last one powerful enough to seriously challenge us. Alexei holstered his weapon and turned to me, his hands coming up to frame my face with fingers still warm from firing. It's done. Corvino is dead. His organization is mine. And everyone in New York now knows exactly what happens when they threaten you. Thank you. I wasn't sure what I was thanking him for. Protecting me, avenging the threat, showing me this dark corner of his world, proving his love through violence. Maybe all of it, maybe none of it specifically. Just gratitude for being alive and safe and his. Don't thank me for this. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, his eyes dark with something between triumph and regret. Thank me by staying, by choosing this life despite knowing what it requires, by loving me despite watching what I become to protect you. I've seen what you become. I held his gaze, making sure he heard every word. You become the man who protects what he loves more fiercely than anything else in this world. You become the monster other monsters fear. You become powerful enough that threatening what's yours becomes suicide. And that man, that dangerous, powerful, absolutely ruthless man, that's who I love. All of you, Alexei, even the parts covered in blood. His kiss tasted like gunpowder and violence and promises for futures that would be complicated and dangerous and absolutely worth fighting for. When he pulled away, his forehead pressed to mine, his voice rough with emotion he rarely showed. You fix everything you touch, Mia Turner. Broken machines, impossible problems, shattered men who thought they were beyond repair. You fixed me, made me human again when I'd forgotten what that felt like. Made me believe I could be more than just the monster I'd become. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth the risk you took by loving me. You already have. I held his face in my hands stained with oil that would never wash completely clean, hands that fixed broken things and built impossible solutions, hands that this dangerous man trusted to touch him gently despite everything. You already have, Alexei. Every day, every moment. Every time you look at me like I'm something precious rather than useful. You're worth everything. The danger, the violence, the complicated reality of loving a man whose empire is built on fear. You're worth it all. We stood there in Gennady Corvino's office, surrounded by the violence necessary to protect what we'd built. Two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other despite every logical reason it shouldn't work. And as Alexei's men began the process of claiming this warehouse, this territory, this victory, I understood something fundamental about our future. It would never be safe, would never be simple, would never be the fairy tale other people got to live. But it would be real, and it would be ours, and it would be worth fighting for every single day for the rest of our lives. because Alexei Morozov had asked who fixed his car, and I'd stepped forward covered in oil and exhaustion and stubborn determination. And in that moment, I'd fixed more than just his Mercedes. I'd fixed the human parts of him he thought were beyond repair, made him remember what it felt like to love and be loved, given him something worth protecting more fiercely than power or money or empire. And he'd fixed me in return, given me security where I'd had only struggle, purpose where I'd had only survival, love where I'd had only loneliness. We fixed each other, piece by piece, touch by touch, until we both functioned better together than we ever had apart. That was our truth. That was our story. And nothing, not threats, not violence, not the constant danger of Alexei's world, would ever change the fundamental fact that we belonged to each other, completely and irrevocably, for better or worse, until death finally pulled us apart.